As you're watching this video, I'm currently having a wonderful time in the fairy tale land of Efteling. Video coming soon. So I thought, while I'm away doing that, why not upload a video surrounding the polar opposite kind of environment, all about horror attractions, scare mazes. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not a scare veteran, I've only done 5 scare mazes. However, I've done enough to be able to form an opinion of what I believe is good in a scare attraction and what isn't. So I thought, why not rank the 5 scare mazes I've done? I'm going to warn you now, the majority of them are Fright Nights mazes, so can only apologise for that. But regardless, I've certainly seen quite a variety in the quality of different scare experiences, and as someone who's visually impaired especially, I really want to talk about what I think makes a good scare attraction, because I think it's really important to consider more than just what you see in terms of great theming. It's all about the sounds, smells, and even touching as well. Yeah, I like touching in scare attractions. Take that as you will. Anyway, I'm waffling now. Let's cut to it.
Oh dear. Oh dear, dear, dear.
I know I'm going to upset some people with this, but it's the truth. At number 5, we have Stitches, the new for 2023 maze at Thorpe Park Fright Nights. This maze, which is returning for 2024, is located in the Cantina event area of the park, opposite Rush in the Lost City themed area. This maze invites guests to step into Howl's Toy Emporium, a heavily themed toy factory. Now you may be thinking, oh, toys, that sounds pretty innocent, right? Well, all is not as it seems. The evil toy maker running the toy factory is in fact using humans as toys, sending them to the quote-unquote reject room and subjecting them to all sorts of horrible treatment. The gimmick of this maze is don't turn off the lights. When the lights are on, the toys don't move, but when the lights are off, the toys do move and could give you a good scare. Now you may be thinking this sounds like a pretty impressive maze concept. However, the cast of this maze unfortunately really let it down. This is probably the longest scare maze I've ever done. It's around about 10 minutes in length, and unfortunately there were barely any actors during my run. There was a maximum of about 5, I'd say. Me and Danielle were walking through just dark space for minutes, not seeing anyone. Don't get me wrong, the actors who were in there did a great job. You meet the toy maker's granddaughter at the start, who gives a pre-show which basically introduces the maze's story, and I thought the woman who played that role when I went through did a brilliant job of it. And also the theming was nice, but the problem was it just wasn't scary because there was that few actors in there, and it honestly felt like a family maze. I'm not gonna lie, like an 8-year-old would have probably been fine in there. There's some brilliant props in there, like a bungee cord and all sorts of sound effects, and we were going in rooms and the sound was setting off, the lights were setting off on triggers, but it was clear that there were just actors missing. They weren't where they were supposed to be. And we also found the maze layout to be really confusing as well, such that we ended up walking into the actor corridor 2 or 3 times, meaning an actor had to completely turn us around, and that just completely ruined the experience as well. Now, this maze got rave reviews last year, hence the park have obviously decided to bring it back. So I appreciate that we could have just had a bad run through, but still, that isn't a reason for me to be more lenient on the attraction, because these attractions need to be consistent. People are paying a lot of money to go through them, so if you get a naff run through, then it's pretty infuriating. Thank the Lord for Theme Park Daisy, who gave us free maze tickets. Check out the vlog from last year's Fright Nights to hear that story.
I am, how do I put it lightly, and
Nervous.
very nervous.
At number 4, we have the new for 2021 maze at Thorpe Park Fright Nights, the 20th anniversary maze. Trailers, located in a large building behind the Nemesis Inferno shop in the jungle themed area of the park. Now, this maze has a special place in my heart. I experienced it for the first ever time in 2022 when I visited Fright Nights for the first time, and it was actually my first ever scare maze. It is themed to the Super Park Cinema, where you are visiting for a Halloween binge watch of movies. However, when you get into the cinema, a dodgy projectionist manages to cause a huge power surge, causing a portal to open up into the actual movies themselves. And the idea is you're going through scenes themed to past horror attractions at Thorpe Park, and you're essentially seeing the best bits. You're seeing what would be the trailers for the films for which these mazes are based upon. So you're going through scenes themed to the likes of the Big Top, which was a circus themed maze that was at Thorpe Park a few years ago. You've got a jungle scene themed to the infamous Vulcan Peak maze, and you've also got a dentist room which is themed to the Asylum maze that used to be at Thorpe Park, which actually ran for a really long time, but unfortunately had to close eventually due to controversies. Now eventually you do manage to make it out of the portal back into the cinema. However, the caveat is that some of the creatures from inside the trailers have managed to escape, so you have to make a quick getaway through the projection room where you've got all smoke and electricity effects, and you get chased by a bunch of actors out the maze. So that does act as a really good finale, I've got to say. What I will say is this is a brilliant starter maze. It gives you a great idea of a bunch of different scare tactics. You've got drop boxes in there. You've got one scene where you've got a bunch of what looks like actors, but there's only one real actor and they move. That scene doesn't do much for me because I'm visually impaired, but it's good that that's in there, as it's a common type of scare in some mazes that you can familiarise yourself with. You've got a bed scare in there as well, so there's a lot of variety. However, with me recommending it as a starter maze, as you can imagine, it's not that scary compared to some other attractions I've done. There's very little use of tight spaces in there. The rooms are very, very open, and that means that some of the actor scares can be from quite a distance, so they're not quite as impactful as in some other mazes I've done. But even so, it's a brilliantly themed maze. I've heard that people have had some bad runs through it, but I can only go off my experience, and from my experience there's been plenty of actors in there.
An actor asked me and Josh to get on our knees and crawl like dogs.
At number 3 we have the new for 2022 maze at Thorpe Park Fright Nights, Survival Games. Located in and around some shipping containers housed in a large tent structure on a plaza just to the right of Swarm Island. Now, I was bricking it before I went into this maze because this is actually the only maze on this list, bit of a spoiler alert, where the actors can touch you. It is essentially themed to a game show where your aim is to survive. The idea is that if you survive, you'll get famous and aim your blue verification tick. I get it's a bit of a weird theme, and I can't lie, it's not really explained very well in the maze's pre-show, but it is what it is, and the scares make up for it. As soon as you enter the maze, you are ambushed by a couple of actors and immediately shoved into some cages.
Lawyer, move now! You stand here face the front and keep this cage open! Oi! Stand there and shut up!
So yeah, as you can tell, the actors are very aggressive, notably more aggressive and in your face than in the mazes we've discussed so far. You're then held in those cages where the storyline is explained. Now here's a bit of a big spoiler, so if you don't want to hear it, then skip about 20 seconds of this video. But you'd think you'd be let out of these cages normally, right, into the show itself. However, this is not the case, as you are suddenly, one by one, from behind, grabbed by an actor and pulled through some flaps into the main part of the attraction. And this is all done while the lights are off. So intermittently, every few seconds, the lights are going off, there's a bit of a sound effect, and people are just disappearing, which, for the people who are taken later on in this sequence, which wasn't the case for me, as I was actually taken first. This is such a brilliant effect. The actual grab from behind is really good, and as you're going through the rest of the maze, it's completely free flow. There's multiple paths you can take, and all the actors you encounter are equally as aggressive as the ones in the pre-show, and they're just grabbing you, they're in your face, they're pushing you down hallways. I'm not going to completely spoil the ending for this one with the stakes being so high, but I will give a little bit of a spoiler, so just skip 10 seconds or so. There is a chainsaw, or at least there was last year when I did it for the first time. Don't get me wrong, the maze isn't brilliantly themed. The first half of it is, where you're sort of going through the backstage area, but then in the second half, the idea is that you've kind of made it into the arena that you're fighting in. So the actual TV show set itself, and this isn't very well themed at all. There is some strobe lighting, but really it's just a lot of black walls. There's a crawl section in there. When I went through the maze, one actor, she was asking me to get on my knees and crawl like a doggy. I've got to say, it's the first time that anyone's ever asked me to do that. On the subject of that, obviously I'm visually impaired, and you might be thinking how I got on in there, with the actors obviously splitting you up and putting you in separate cages and sending you through separately. Luckily, I managed to stay with Josh from Theme Park Mad. I don't know whether the actors caught on to the fact I was visually impaired or not, but they actually put me and Josh in a cage together, because those cages can actually hold a maximum of 2 people, and no other actors tried to separate us, so we managed to stay together for the whole thing, and he just guided me through. But Thorpe Park, if you are watching this, I just want to say that it would be ideal for these sorts of mazes if you could offer some sort of lanyard. I know you do the no scare lanyard for people who don't want to get scared by the actors in the scare zones and stuff, but just one for people like myself who can't be split up from a carer, just to indicate that to the actors. Obviously we can be split up from the rest of the group that go in there, but I need to be with at least one person at all given times in mazes, and obviously that will apply to a lot of other disabled people as well. So a no splitting up lanyard would be great. I know it can be very inconsistent in terms of run-throughs. People have said that they've literally been in there 2 minutes and actors have literally guided them to the exit, which, if you are a scare actor who works in survival games, please explain to me why. Surely you'd want to get people more scared and keep them in there for longer. And equally, I've heard people have been in there as long as 20 minutes. For me personally, it was probably just under 10 minutes I was in there. Probably about 7 minutes or so, which I was satisfied with. But overall, I really enjoyed the maze, and I think the touching especially made the scares a lot more impactful.
You have to be 10 to go in this, but I recommend 12 plus personally.
But coming in at number 2, we have the only non-Fright Nights maze on this list, and that is Pasaje del Terror, located just outside Blackpool Pleasure Beach. This maze is actually the longest running scare maze in the UK, having opened way back in 1998. And is themed to various popular horror films and horror literature that have been around, and it has been updated over time to bring it more up to date with what is beloved in horror for the time. I do wonder whether trailers actually did get some inspiration from this maze, because there are a lot of similarities between them. It is a mashup maze, and in case you couldn't guess already, a mashup maze is essentially any maze that has more than one theme. Passage has virtually no storyline whatsoever beyond the fact that you are experiencing your worst nightmares, obviously in this horror world that's located in the basement of the casino building, which leads me on to the actual introduction to this maze, so to speak, the initial safety briefing, which is done so well. You're led down this really well themed staircase that's themed to sort of the outsides of a church, where you actually have the briefing itself, all done more so in character than you normally get. And then you're led to the pre-show, which is literally done in a pitch black room in this sort of chapel setting, and it's just so atmospheric. There's a really good scare in there as well, and just the entire maze is done so well. There's such a variety of scares. It's beautifully themed. I'm going to say it's the best themed maze on this list. But you've got a grave digger banging a shovel against metal in a graveyard, making a lot of loud noise, which is always great in a scare attraction. More scare attractions need to utilise sounds to the full potential, and Passage just do it perfectly, both for ambience and for scare. Passage is also renowned for being a very consistent maze due to the way they set up the scares. A lot of them are pretty choreographed to how they would be from their respective movie, which means the actors always know where they need to be. And I have massive respect for a maze that's consistent, because consistency, I understand, is hard to achieve in scare mazes, but it's so important to making sure that everyone has an equally terrifying experience. Another thing that Passage do to help maintain consistency, and I sympathise that bigger scare events such as Fright Nights can't really do this, is they separate the groups out by quite a bit, which gives the actors more than enough time to reset, ready for the next group. So normally in a scare maze, you'd be sending a group in every 1 to 2 minutes. However, Passage leave it a good 5 minutes between groups, and that means that you're in there absolutely on your own with your group of 6 or 8. There's no chance of you catching up to the group in front. You've got a room themed to the possessed girl from The Exorcist, which has a brilliant bed scare. That scene has apparently been there since the attraction opened, and honestly you wouldn't think so. It's so well done. You've got a couple of other movie themed scenes in there as well, such as a Nightmare on Elm Street scene, a Halloween scene. Despite it being a mashup maze, the scenes flow together so well, they complement each other so well. They're all very different to each other in terms of the scares they're giving, and the whole attraction is just a beautiful package that if you're a scary enthusiast in the UK, you need to get to urgently. Don't get me wrong, I do feel like the actors could do a few more close-up scares in there, as a lot of them scare from quite far away, which isn't ideal for me with me being visually impaired. But even so, because the actors are utilising the props so well and the sound triggers in there so well, the scares still come off really intense.
Bloody hell!
And finally, at number 1, we have the infamous, the fan favourite Thorpe Park Fright Nights maze, Creek Freak Massacre. Don't get me wrong, Hyperia is an amazing roller coaster, but it is such a shame that we had to lose this amazing maze for it, because honestly, there's nothing that has quite managed to top what I experienced in here. This maze was new for 2019, it then had a year off due to COVID restrictions and came back for 2021 and 2022 when I experienced it for my first ever time. It was my second ever scare maze after experiencing trailers, and oh boy, I threw myself in the deep end here. It was located in the old Loggers Leap station, Loggers Leap being a log flume that used to operate at the park. And considering it's in such a compact space, it's by far the most compact maze on this list and definitely the shortest in length. They did so well to get in the scares they did and the theming they did. This maze is themed to a sawmill known as the Creekwood Sawmill, which is home to characters known as buckwheat, who are essentially workers who chop up wood and sort wood. However, they've got bored of wood, so instead of chopping up wood, they decided they want to start chopping up humans. The idea is that you've arrived at the sawmill as new employees, and you need to get to work. And all appears good at first. However, you soon find out that the other quote-unquote employees are out to get you. This maze is impeccably well designed, it's somewhat free flow as there's multiple paths at points, and it's just so claustrophobic in there. There's a lot of tight corridors with it being confined to such a small space, meaning that when the actors jump out to do the scares, they are right in your face. And the way all the corridors are configured in the maze allowed the actors to get in multiple scares for the same group, so it felt there was more actors in there than there actually was, and that is clear from feedback the maze got. It was renowned for being a really consistent maze in terms of scares compared to Thorpe's other mazes. That's not to mention the fact that there were 2 chainsaws in there. There was one halfway through, and again, the guy in there, he utilised the actor corridors so well, so you'd run away for the chainsaw and you'd think you got away, and suddenly he'd appear with it again, and this would go on for like 20 seconds or so, and you wouldn't normally expect a chainsaw halfway through the maze as well. That's normally the sort of thing you get as a final run out, so it's something that would catch a lot of people off guard. But then you also did have a second chainsaw on the run out, and this guy got me good. Like, we were practically in the exit, me, Josh and Danielle, and he just came from nowhere and chased us with this chainsaw. Bearing in mind, when you've got someone chasing you with a massive industrial weapon, it's pretty intimidating. I tried to run out and ended up pushing Josh and Danielle into a door frame, and they got a couple of bruises. And then even after that, you had like an air cannon that would go off, simulating like a gunshot.
Bloody hell!
So then that'd keep you running out, like, as a final just blow. And they utilised tactile stuff as well in there, which I really appreciate being visually impaired. So they had like meat flaps hanging down, they had a load of body bags hanging down, and they made sure this stuff felt all wet and disgusting to touch. They had these rollers that you'd often find in like a kid's play area at one point of the maze to go through, and those were to simulate a machine that took the bark off trees, or as the buckwheats eventually would go on to use them for, to slice skin off people. And we've never quite seen anything like it at Thorpe Park since, and it's a shame. Stitches, which replaced it, really didn't live up to it in my opinion whatsoever, and I really hope that the new maze that comes to the park this year has a similar sort of feel to Creek Freak, where there's no massive storyline really. You're just going through these tight corridors and there's a ton of impact scares, there's a chainsaw here and there, and everyone's just having a brilliant and terrifying time. But in the meantime, Pasaje del Terror, as I said, is a brilliant scare attraction that I did very recently, which is why you want to go and check out this video on the right side of your screen. It's my recent review from the attraction, completely spoiler free, and for more things theme park related in the UK and beyond, make sure you click the icon in the centre of your screen to subscribe.